to the North Group, security refined by intelligence. We're here to spotlight the best practices and critical safety and security issues in today's world and provide actionable strategies that you can implement into your day-to-day operations. From the individual to organizational level, our goal is to improve your risk management and response capabilities. Thanks for spending time with us today, and here's your host.
So good morning, everybody. Steve Hernandez here with the North Group. We have some amazing guests on today. We're going to discuss things regarding cyber and information security and what the world of technology is doing today and what it looks like tomorrow. So without further ado, Chris, Ashley, why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Sounds good, and it's a pleasure to be here with you guys today. And so I'll kind of start. So my name is Chris Bullock. I'm actually the CEO and managing member of Cyber Investigations and Intelligence Agency. I have a lengthy background, so I'm not going to go into a lot of length in that background, but I'll say that I have over 3 decades of law enforcement experience and over 2 decades of experience as a CISO, executive cybersecurity leader at many Fortune 100 companies, and have done a great deal of work in penetration testing and digital forensics.
Yes, hi, and I'm Ashley Ferguson. I'm president and managing member of Cyber Investigations and Intelligence Agency, also known as CI2A, and I bring 2 decades of risk management, compliance, privacy, and security experience across a variety of industries.
So we are punching way above our weight class with you two on technology here. So we'll try to keep it on our level so that we can understand.
Absolutely.
Understand, because you guys just have so much experience. A lot of times we hear the things like, terminology like cybersecurity, information security. A lot of times clients will go, I need security, but they're talking about cyber. A lot of times folks will come to you and say, I need security. They're not talking about cyber. They're talking about physical. So there's definitely a big difference in the industry, right? Between what a physical security risk management consultant and a cyber security consultant does, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And in fact, interestingly, I've actually written some papers on this, but, cyber can manifest itself into a physical situation, and, a physical situation can, vis-a-vis manifest itself over to a physical situation. So, it can go both ways, or cyber situation. So it can go both ways, in the way that it manifests itself. I think the two together are definitely 2 areas now that have to be explored together because of the exposure that everyone has, and the way that technology is burgeoning in our society today.
Now, what do you guys, when you hear the term digital footprint, right? Because I have a lot of clients, and we use this term with our customers all the time, that we need to understand what your digital footprint is, because exactly to what you just said, that does open the risk liability profile up to greater exposure when their digital footprint is higher. So can you talk about that digital footprint for both, industry professionals that listen to the podcast, clients, employees of the industry, and help them understand exactly your guys' perspective as industry providers, what that digital footprint does?
Certainly, yes. And, digital footprint, actually, I can joke about it from time to time. It's kind of becoming a buzz term in the industry. And many organizations actually, and ones that claim to be experts, don't really realize exactly what a digital footprint is. So most of the time you'll hear folks say that the digital footprint is mainly what they do on the internet or their social media exposure, those types of things. But it's actually so much more than that. It's about the habit-based information that's retained on us as individuals by organizations. It's about the settings on their smartphone. Significant locations is an example there. Your sync settings in iCloud and what they all allow for external parties to gather. The information that you're connected to via your smartphone, it collects so much data on us, every minute, and the people who have access to that could be nefarious individuals, or nefarious individuals can gain access to that through techniques. So digital footprint, as it's commonly talked about, is really much more. It's much larger than what most people think it is. And I'm gonna throw it over to Ashley too for her thoughts on that. So.
Yes, absolutely. And it's I think people in this age, I was particularly within the pandemic, there's so much more activity online that families and individuals and corporations didn't realize and plan for in this day and age. I mean, if you look at the example of TikTok, there's been all of these different pieces. Zoom came into the conversation. And so people really take a step back and look at the information that's being collected and how it's being used. So even when you look at certain free services out there and that collection of data and information and really how that creates essentially that digital footprint that can create pattern of life indications for an individual, provide information about their habits, how to advertise for them, but it also creates an exposure area in the cyber world.
Yeah, it actually provides a pathway to an attack. As we know, just as physical protections are important, that most criminals who are going to take their time and maybe a little more advanced, even some not so advanced, gather intelligence before they perform an attack. One main reason, because they don't want to get caught. They don't want to get in trouble and or be harmed. By if it's say it's a homeowner, it's a home invasion. So they do a lot of intelligence gathering. The kind of folks that we work and deal with from a cyber criminal perspective are typically more advanced type of criminals, or they're criminals that are traditional that have become advanced because the tools available to do so have become so easy to use. You can watch a YouTube video on how to go and commit specific types of attacks today and not even have to know a whole lot about technology. So the exposure that we have from a digital footprint perspective is providing that intelligence gathering. Most of the times when I've done penetration tests in the past, and any penetration tester you'll talk to, which is a penetration tester is basically somebody that does what's called ethical hacking. They try to attack an organization before the attackers attack the organization to show them where their weaknesses are so they can shore those up. Well, the intelligence gathering phase of a pen test is one of the most important pieces, and it really utilizes that what we call open source intelligence information, and we'll probably get into that in a bit, I'm sure, but all the other additional information. Well, it's becoming so exposed now from a daily life routine activity perspective, because we all have our smartphones with us, daily, and the things that they're transmitting out about us, the various applications and such, are providing a lot of information for those attackers to attack from.
What do you feel? You mentioned TikTok, so I've been getting a lot of stories about TikTok, both from parents on my child's football team, neighbors, former clients, current clients. Everybody's asking about TikTok. I put something out on social media recently. I just said TikTok's a no-go. Stay away from it. A lot of exposures. To talk about that real quick. Talk to listeners and help them understand what the risk factor is there.
Absolutely, yeah. So TikTok, it's got multiple vulnerabilities in it. Many social media platforms do. I believe, part of the nation-state ownership that's been identified from TikTok is a thing that's, kind of disturbing. Some of the attacks that are out there have been, the being able to do some of the fake video swapping and impersonations, those types of things. And TikTok in and of itself, just like any other social media platform, we tell all our clients, any social media exposure, you really need a limit. A lot of these, one thing I didn't mention about my background is I've done a lot of work for Internet Crimes Against Children's Unit. I've been an investigator for probably 2 decades now in that area. The exposure for children for social media, and particularly TikTok, Instagram, there's so many different social media platforms that the bad guys know that they come in from a certain angle to attack. And unfortunately, children are one of the main groups that are attacked, because we have that, very nefarious piece of our population that, has bad intentions with children. So, I think just like any other social media platform, TikTok's very risky, and completely agree, because of the way that kind of the TikTok infrastructure is kind of put together, that it's probably more exposed than most social media platforms.
So we talk about the importance of knowing the digital footprint. What type of both external or internal risk assessment can individuals perform, both on the customer facing side or just everyday citizens, everyday individuals that don't necessarily need to hire folks like us, but what can they do to understand their risk profile? How can they evaluate the digital footprint, and what recommendations would you give to those individuals?
Sure. Yeah, I think it may be good to kind of talk about, first that importance of knowing your digital footprint, as you kind of mentioned. The typical ways that one actually hears of the digital footprint being used is, identity theft, fraud, extortion. However, there are actually many other, more covert ways in which someone's digital footprint can be used nefariously against them, to the extent it can even be used to plan an up-close and personal attack, as we said, manifest itself from a cyber situation to a physical situation. Today there's over 70% of the population that's connected to social media. There actually right now is over 31 billion connected things on the internet, and you'll hear that term, another buzz term in IT, but it's called the Internet of Things, which basically means anything other than a computer system that's attached to the internet. So our refrigerators, our grills, there are so many different things now that connect and have a Wi-Fi connection and get on the internet. That footprint becomes broader and broader and broader. If you ask most people to put their smartphone down for just an hour, they can't do it. Society has slowly been fed this addiction of technology, to the extent that it takes a deliberate and concerted effort to actually uncement ourselves from our technology, even for a short period of time. The nefarious actors are learning this. They know this, particularly ones that are going to take their time to, really do a very specific type of attack. Each and every technology in a person's life can provide that specific, as Ashley mentioned earlier, pattern of life activity about that person. So from the thermostats to the smart locks to the smart blinds, smart water meters, we've worked a lot of different cases where we found vulnerabilities in various types of Internet of Things devices that are connected things inside of a home that can be used against those individuals, from locks that are online that can be breached, to blinds that can be manipulated, to audio-visual systems that can be turned and used to surveil the individuals. Even the metadata, or the data about data, that's what metadata is when we talk about metadata. So if you think about the date and time stamp of a file, the date and time something's occurring from a technology perspective, somebody's turning their thermostat up, for instance, when they're in that home. There's been even reports and read a lot of research around some of the smart water meters and knowing when an individual flushes their toilet. Now, all this sounds very James Bondish, but it's actually becoming used now because of the connected way that we are in this society. And so it only takes a few keystrokes to actually locate valuable information on someone. And, if you put additional effort into it and add a few of those, openly available tools I was talking about and watch a YouTube video here or there, you can start to really become the target of a criminal and can be surveilled very easily in your life. To unwind all that is almost impossible. But there are specific things that you can do. And individuals first need to understand their exposures. One of the things that we kind of start to do when we do our initial assessments is let's inventory all your technology and let's inventory what it does and how it's connected. We go into the configurations of those technologies. A lot of people, a lot of actual major celebrities have fallen victim to the way that iCloud syncs and the photos that they have that are out there, and they didn't realize they didn't want those photos out, but they synced, and then somebody ends up, breaching that iCloud instance or their device itself, and then those kinds of things escape. So it's very programmatic, and you have to be very intentional when you start to reduce that footprint. That's a great question you asked because it takes so much to go and unwind from those things, and it's literally a program that you have to put in place either individually for yourself to say, hey, I know everything that's connected, but do I know how it's configured? Do I know how it's actually beaconing out? Do I know what's being synced, quote unquote, right? And all for the convenience of us, of the humans. Technology is here for our convenience, and it's that a lot of times. But now, unfortunately, it's exposing us.
Well,
and to add, I was going to add to that, just because I'm sure there are listeners who are saying, I don't have my, door locks online, or I'm not using a smart refrigerator or things like that. But I think pretty much almost every person out there is probably going to say, yes, I have a smart TV, and yes, I have a smartphone. And so, some simple things that people can do is really go in and look at those settings, see what is turned on and see what is turned off, and see what is being collected. Because by default, a lot of those, systems are collecting or sending information, whether it be for research purposes or to give you access to things. And so, as we mentioned earlier with TikTok and different applications that people may download to their phones, they're constantly asking for access to different pieces. And as like Chris mentioned with photos, if you're giving access to your photos to something to change the look of your face or to edit something or to make a change, that is giving access to that particular mechanism within your phone and collecting that data. So with each of those applications or devices that get connected, you're giving them permission to access certain areas within your, whether it be your smart TV, your smartphone, or other things within there. So in each area, you're giving that permission to certain areas that collectively add to that digital footprint and give exposures to other areas within those devices.
Absolutely. Just like I said at the beginning, brilliant information. You guys are just highly, highly intelligent when it comes to all this. And I think our listeners are absolutely going to agree, especially ones in the industry, that this threat is ever growing. From a targeter's perspective, from a guy that, does the surveillance, goes out, finds the loopholes, and then brings, both white hat or black hat people into the situation to identify and exploit, I think that a lot of foreign state security, foreign entities are using these very things you guys are talking about to exploit, collect, and also harm certain aspects of, economics and clients that may pose an economic threat to them. So I think that this threat, as it grows, there's only going to be more work. There's only going to be more concern. When we talk about a digital footprint regarding someone of notoriety, high net worth, ultra high net worth, what's what do you think the importance is for those folks, those family office managers, directors of security, to be performing their risk assessments when it comes to the client's digital footprint?
Yes, that's a great question. We oftentimes get asked that, do we think that the digital footprint's, actually more important to a high notoriety, high wealth, even a high stakes individual. So, someone that has an important job that an attacker may be targeting because of that job they have or who they're connected with in their line of work. So the digital footprint, is really important to everyone from a privacy and safety perspective. However, to someone who's actually high notoriety, high wealth, high stakes, it's more important to fortify it because they're actually more likely to be a target of criminals with more patience, resources, and bad intent. So again, once you start getting in this intel gathering piece, and I'm sure you've seen this in the work that y'all, the awesome work you guys do, from the kinetic side, when they take their time, they seem to be more nefarious. When they're gathering intelligence, they have a lot of bad intent. They're trying to do it right. They're taking their time with the attack. And, if you actually think about, I like putting things in terms of physical sometimes around cyber. And so if you think about a standard home, there's locks on that home. There's possibly a home video surveillance system. There's possibly an alarm, and it is fortified, but no one, actually knows what valuables are inside that home. Not necessarily. So, the criminal, passes homes daily. But now think of a bank or jewelry store, and there's always locks. There's always video surveillance. There's always alarms, and there's even a vault in most cases, right? So this is because it's more likely a target due to it being known as a high-value target. Same thing goes in cyber, in the way cyber attacks occur. Because it's very similar to that, because the high notoriety, high wealth, high stakes individual, and even worse, they have to deal with motives that may be atypical from what a criminal would have, because they have to deal with motives, such as revenge. It's politically motivated, potentially, as you mentioned, nation state sponsored, potentially, activist motivated. We're seeing a lot of that today, or, again, nation state motivated, rather than just the greed motive. In our company, we do something very unique, and we put a cyber criminological and cyber victimological approach to the assessments that we do. So we actually give, assign a victimological score, and we look at for attribution and who's more likely to, be attributed to do an attack on an individual. So for the family offices, for the executive protection teams, understanding that there's this, kind of third dimension that you have to look at outside of just the physical that can breach into the physical is very important. And those things, being the cyber intelligence that can be gathered on an individual. We saw with Stuxnet, that attack was a cyber attack, and it turned into a dangerous situation because, it attacked machinery that was basically, made to operate in a way and such it would cause danger to the people on the other side. This same kind of thing can happen. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
You talk about IoT, right? I mean, IoT.
Yes.
And I think that's a term that we should be screaming from the rooftops right now, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Internet of Things it opens up, it makes that leap. When you say that, it makes that leap from cyber to physical, because now you've got a physical device in a home, in a car. There have been successful hacks against the braking systems of vehicles, which, when used very nefariously to harm somebody, it gets very dangerous. So yes, absolutely.
I mean,
I'm a very optimistic person, but I would say, if you look at this from the, scarier point of view, is look at every piece of technology that is intended to make your life easier and take a second look at it and see, because obviously there is some effort to make money behind that, or to potentially create a situation to commit a crime against you using that technology. So it's not that you don't want to use this technology and make your life better. It's trying to use it in a way that you are educated and smart about the way that you use it, and you're able to make those adjustments, making sure you understand that awareness of the exposure it could create.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when we talk about, circuit override and different things from the physical red team perspective and all that, I think there's such a blend with physical risk analysis, cyber risk analysis. I don't think somebody should be top heavy on one or the other. From a risk manager's,
agree.
I think it depends on what your industry is, what you do, and what your exposure is. But I think from an assessment standpoint, equality is very important on both the physical and the cyber. Talk to us about, from what you can, obviously, due to OPSEC, but talk to us about unique situations that your firm has worked or seen.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And, I'll be very generic, but, we've seen situations, but as I mentioned, where, the ability to attack those home automation systems exists. We've successfully breached or penetrated those systems. We've seen AV equipment that can be flipped around basically and utilized, as Ashley mentioned, the smart TV, for instance, to surveil the occupants within. We have worked with executives and, for instance, worked with an animal byproducts executive who was experiencing, protests and those types of physical, pieces at their organization, but then also started experiencing trolling from some animal rights activist groups. When I say trolling, we're talking about, invading every aspect of their online presence. The people, they call it trolls, but there are actual professional troll groups out there, just like there's professional, rioting groups and those types of things. These groups are oftentimes attached to activist groups, and they are really good at making someone's life a nightmare from the perspective of cyber. And so we've worked on those types of cases where they were doxing these individuals, placing their most sensitive data out into the public, throwing it out onto social media, following some of their YouTube videos, and things that they were doing to promote themselves, their brand, and then, making light of that, placing photos up that had been, morphed, and actually trying to destroy their reputation, making up stories, providing false information that wasn't true about these individuals, and really caused them, multiple areas of financial harm and reputational harm. It also causes a very serious emotional harm to these individuals. We've seen very sad breakdowns of individuals because of what they've had to experience from a cyber perspective. And Steve, the problem too is that law enforcement, unfortunately, and I came from law enforcement, and it's nothing against them, but they are not prepared to handle cybercrime. About the best you can get for cybercrime, and for a law enforcement agency that can handle cybercrime, you're going to have to go to the federal level, and they don't have the time, and there has to be certain thresholds before they get involved. I know as a CISO, where I've dealt with data breach situations, they wouldn't get involved until there's a certain monetary amount, to the extent they can. It's because they're overworked. There's not enough of them. And you start getting to the local agencies. I mean, you can just kind of hang it up. For one thing, they don't have the training. There's some limited training in cybercrime out there for law enforcement, not a lot. And we get the local jurisdictions, it's all about, having to solve the worst crimes first, obviously, which they should be. But the time it takes to investigate a cyber type crime is very difficult. So when we get involved in a situation, and some of those situations I mentioned to you that we could talk about, we are able to give it specific focus. We are able to actually take the time to investigate it. We've got to train the skills. Between Ashley and I, we have about 7 decades of CISO work, where we created those programs that protected Fortune 100 companies. And I want to just inject something too about the Internet of Things devices that I just thought about. When you start thinking about the IoT devices, one thing people, I think your audience really needs to know, is that IoT devices can't be updated as easily as, when you get the notice that, hey, there's a new Microsoft patch on your computer, and you go and update. A lot of times they have to be flashed, and that doesn't happen, or they just don't have the ability to update. So those vulnerabilities that are found remain. And until you remove that device, that vulnerability is there, and the ability to attack it is there. And that's some of what we saw in the one particular case I was talking about. Is they had an older type of IoT device that had that vulnerability, and unfortunately, the only way to remove that vulnerability wasn't to patch it or update it. They had to be removed. And so that convenience factor is immediately taken away. But the way that they like to utilize this particular device, and we had to quickly find a device that was shored up and secure for them to kind of replace that piece.
So let me ask a question, because you mentioned something that's come up in my personal life with people that are both in the construction industry, right? And say custom home development. You have clients that build a brand new home and they put a Control 4 unit in there. What's the exposure to those Control 4 units that run security, lighting, heating, cooling, HVAC, all of that, right? What's the exposure to those clients?
They are pretty much exposed to any activity that device can do. It can be monitored for pattern of life activities. That's something that can, the logs that it produces, the information it's beaconing out. It has to be the ability for the technology companies that produce those units to be able to correct them or fix them when they have problems. So there's logs that are there. And all of that, it provides that pattern of life activity. It also, when you start talking about the physical pieces there, if it's got a vulnerability, you can breach that device potentially, and then have it be utilized for the attacker's benefit. For instance, you heard the stories about the Alexa and Siri listening in on your conversations. Well, they do. It stores conversations, and a smart TV, a smart lighting system, can start to provide those pieces of intel information about when you're home, when you're away. What's your favorite month to take vacation? It really can go and provide so much information. And so what you have to do, is know what is beaconing out, and then block those types of transmissions. One thing we like to say, from the CISO perspective, from being a CISO, is that there's always an administrator behind even the most protected piece of technology. So what does that mean? That means there's a human being somewhere that has full access to everything, no matter how protected, how encrypted, how defended that technology is. There's always an administrator that has to be able to fix that, so that administrator can be a bad person. That administrator may not be bad, but they could have weak habits themselves that expose the technologies that they support. So when you start putting in those types of systems that you just talked about, that actually manage the whole home kind of automation, You're dealing with, administrators. You're dealing with weaknesses in human beings that actually develop the applications, and the vulnerabilities that they have. You're dealing with things that you have to correct, and have to correct at a certain period of time and quickly. Most of the time, so that those vulnerabilities don't get out into a situation that causes exposure for that client.
What do you feel is the future of this? And when we move away from the conversation here and start talking about more OSINT type stuff, but what do you feel is the future? Is it only going to get worse? I mean, and just kind of a short answer, is it only going to get worse, or are we getting better? I know that's a hard answer to shorten, but you got quantum computing, you got all these things that are supposed to change and revolutionize cybersecurity. But are we really getting safer, or are we really getting more and more exposed?
I believe we are getting more and more exposed. And I'm sure Ashley agrees with this. I mean, you think about big data, big data, another buzzword, but big data, artificial intelligence. Everything, just like Ashley mentioned, that results in convenience also results in exposure. I mean, you can really look at it that way. It's unfortunate, but that's exactly the way it is. Big data means that they're, collecting all this data in one central location to make everybody's life easy. That's a very simplistic view of it, but it's also one big chunk of data in one place that has vulnerabilities that an attacker can get so much information from. Before computers, when there was fraud, financial fraud, it wasn't that you'd have to go steal a credit card or steal a checkbook. Now you can access a database and have, you had one victim in that case, then you have, millions of victims with just a little bit of work. You've got all their financial records. So I think it's only getting worse. And actually, I know you're going to want to input into that a little bit as well.
Yes, I would agree. And like I said, though, I don't want this to be at all a discouraging conversation. I think this is where it comes in and where we really try to help our clients as we're doing this, because we recognize that in order to continue to operate, these pieces of changes and technologies are going to enter into an individual's lives and the lives of their families and their children. And so really taking a step back and saying, recognizing that these are things that I may or may not choose to use. Obviously there's going to be certain ones that they say I'm not going to use. I'm not going to, as we mentioned, TikTok, I'm not going to download and use TikTok as a, personal choice. There are other things that people may choose to say, I'm going to accept that risk, but recognizing what risks that expose. So really understanding what data exposure is out there, what things about your usage habits are out there, recognizing what can be pulled back. So when we say reducing that digital footprint, and what can't be reduced. And so when you are actually able to empower someone with understanding what their exposures are, that enables them to better understand when an attack is occurring or someone's trying to use an angle to get out there and gather certain information or use information in a way. They understand how to react to that. So a lot of our mission with our clients is giving them some of that training and understanding. I always cringe when you see these let's fill out these forms of, hey, let's answer all these questions and where did you meet me, and let's talk about these things, and try to inform individuals. That's a data gathering exercise of let's understand some of these things about your life. And really, if you think about it, a lot of it reaches back into the past. So it's looking for answers to things that you might have used as security questions, or that are possibly things that are in your life prior to technology that are not going to be as easy to find out there, and you're giving them a pathway to that. So it's really about empowering our individuals, our clients, individuals out there to understand these are the things that I can control and these are the things that I can't. These are the things that are already out there, and understanding how those things may be used against you in an attack or in an attempt to expose you or your family or your organization.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything you guys just said. I can't tell you, I am by no means a cyber expert, but from a risk manager's perspective, I tell clients every day, you need to understand what your digital footprint is. You need to understand what your cyber exposure is, because from the adversarial approach, That's one way we look at things during a red team. We look at those exposures. So let's talk about the next problem set of exposures that I think is a big tool that we use, and everybody from the military side, law enforcement side, calls it OSINT, open source.
Yes.
But can you explain to individuals that aren't familiar with the term OSINT or open source intelligence, what that means, and both the deep and the dark web side of this conversation? You have the general web. Can you also explain, the deep and the dark web for those that don't understand?
Certainly, yes, and that's a topic that is close to our hearts as well. Is the dark web. It's used a lot today as another. Unfortunately, it's become a little bit of a buzzword to some organizations because again, it's just not widely understood. So you'll hear various different firms out there that say they monitor the dark web, and what does that mean? And so they may just be doing some keyword searches and things that aren't contextual. But for our uses, Stephen, and it's in the way that you utilize it as well, to do your intel gathering, is what can you find out contextually about an individual? What's the context, and then what's valuable to use against them if you're going to try and do an attack against them. And unfortunately, all of us have exposures on the dark web. Let's explain the dark web first. The dark web is really an area of the internet that is accessible only through an encrypted session. So a Tor, for instance, one of the tools utilized to access the dark web. And so it's not an area that you can go Google and see what's on the dark web. You have to actually be inside the dark web and be inside some of those nefarious areas out there. There's a lot of cyber criminal networks inside of the dark web. And some of those areas require you to be vetted. Just like if you're, joining some nefarious group and they want to make sure you're not law enforcement, they want to make sure you're not somebody investigating them, so they have to vet you. And so to be, vetted is a difficult thing. But if you start to do those types of searches, those searches are really looking for data that's been dumped out or some kind of information or intel. And when you start talking about open source intelligence, that is really open source. It's just not known to a lot of people because they actually can download that tool and access it. However, the way and manner in which you do that is you have to be very careful, because you can quickly commit a crime because you go somewhere that drops some photos. Child pornography is rampant on the dark web on your machine, and now you have possession of child pornography and those types of things. But from the perspective of it being used against individuals, most of the data dumps that have occurred that made the headlines have been placed out on the dark web. Many of the exposures of individuals and the communication networks, the criminal element feels much more secure on the dark web, so they'll exchange those types of things out there. Super sensitive information on some of the people they may be going to attack, names, dates of birth, social security numbers, addresses, affiliations, all those types of things are available out there in many cases on the dark web on specific people, on all of us really. I mean, I would be willing to even take that leap and say majority of us who have any kind of credit profile some of our information has been doxed out on the internet or the dark web. You start talking about the surface web or the internet itself, that's the Google side. That's where you can Google in a search engine and start to find information out. Open source intelligence is really not, it's a super cool word, but it's really, not necessarily, that unique of a situation, of a thing to do, let's just say, because it's really just information, just like it says, information that's openly available to anyone. Now, there's various tools that people use. There's various techniques that people can use to go a lot deeper into those open source types of exposures. but everybody has some type of open source intelligence exposure, and so when you start to do that Google on just looking at property tax records, for instance, most all tax records are online. You can find out something about an individual's home. You can find out some of their affiliations. You can actually, we all know, and I know when I was doing SWAT operations, when I was in law enforcement full time, we started to use Google Earth so you can get a good view of where you're going in. What's the wood line look like, near the home? What's the, adjacent facilities beside it, or the business that you may be, going to serve a search warrant on. And so, that all that feeds into open source. I could go down a full, probably hours worth of lists of what open source intelligence pieces are out there, but they're in sources. But if you just start Googling, and all these people finders, people searches, and you can pay $5 here and $10 there, and find out things on people. It's out there. And the dark web is probably more nefarious area again, but there's general dumps of information out there, and there's some good material out on the dark web too. It's just not really, if you're dwelling in the dark web, you're asking to be, exposed to some type of criminal activity. Unfortunately, it's just like any locations you go to. But it's very open source intelligence is a very useful tool when you start to do an attack. It's used by penetration testers again to gather the IP ranges that maybe a certain business or maybe even a home may be part of, based on the carrier that they're using. It's got, again, name, date of birth, address, affiliations, who you're connected with. And you start looking at SOCINT, or social media intelligence, another cool word, but really just means social media intelligence. You're looking at, the habits of individuals there. Where do they eat? I've often said that one of the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world right now isn't an intelligence agency at all. It's the social media platforms. I won't call out any specific names of platforms in that area, but you think about some of the more popular ones and the amount of information that those individuals and those technologists have from an open source perspective on all of us. They can predict your habits just because you like something or you don't like something, or you go to this restaurant on this day and time, or you go to the lake, or you go to the ocean, and what times do you normally do that, and who were you with? Not to be discouraging, as Ashley said, we really help our clients to start to reduce that and understand what it is. We get it. It's fun for a lot of people, and it keeps people connected. But at the same time, there's so many exposures there from an open source intelligence perspective that you have to really be careful.
Well, I can attest to that, because I have tracked a lot of people down across the globe through OSINT. We've used tools. We have the tools, but I'll tell you, since I started in this industry, in the executive protection, security, risk management, risk consulting industry, my ability to find information about people has gotten a lot better. I've done some courses, both in college. I've done some courses independently, and I've got a laundry list of open source tools. I briefly, way back when I was in college, I interned at ATF as an investigative intern, and the Bureau had given us a plethora of open source tools, and I was really surprised that a lot of the agents didn't use it more. But some of the agents had 75 to 100 proxy accounts, and they're tracking gang activity. I mean, their prosecutorial nexus was a video that a convicted felon in a music video that was self-made is brandishing a weapon.
Exactly. Yes. Yes, we've mapped entire motorcycle gangs, and folks, in whole criminal enterprises from social media intelligence, which is just what you're saying. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it's crazy, you know. And I was amazed. I sat in a deposition, and then in the trial, and you know, the prosecutor's office used the AUSA used that video to prosecute this gang member, which ended up rolling over on the entire gang, which led to, you know, drug trafficking charges, led to all kinds of stuff, prostitution charges. But it all stemmed from that agent assigning an analyst to watch these videos. And when they rolled the guy and they said, "Hey, this is third strike. You're going away for 20, felon in possession," you know, this guy flipped. So, I mean, on the law enforcement side, you know, OSINT's a great tool. On the security side, the CISO side, the director of security side, the physical EP side, open source is an amazing tool. I think that, you know, we should consider doing a webinar on it. I think that would be great. With, you know, kind of shifting over from your guys' years of experience in the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer side, what would you say crosses over, you know, and would be good advice for, you know, both the directors of security, the high net worth, and the average, you know, the average person from a cyber protection standpoint? How do you advise them? What do you say to them from that level?
You know, take that one, Ashley.
Absolutely. So I would say, if, you know, we're looking at things within an organization, we've always said, particularly in our firm kind of steps away from the IT side. I mean, IT is an element of security. It's an element of processes within an organization. We've always said to effectively layer security and try to manage your risk. We've said the same thing around trying to be compliant with regulations. So everything is about building this set of, you know, processes and things that you do within there. That really applies universally to personal cybersecurity as well. So not looking at things as a one-size-fits-all approach, that I'm going to go and purchase this or use this and this is going to solve all of my problems. You know, I've often gone to speak at, you know, various different conferences, and, you know, we always internally joke about how you walk in here and everyone has, I have the solution. I have the solution. Everything is a new solution and a new piece. And we see a lot of fatigue on the corporate side, you know, from the Chief Information Security Officer perspective, of all these different tools that come out quite frequently. And so really getting a chance to take a step back and say, you know, what are these pieces that come into play? So really looking at it and managing it, like you said, from a risk management perspective, understanding the exposure and understanding how you would look to protect it and the things that you can't protect, how you analyze and prepare for that exposure, knowing that it's out there. So if you have a source of information that you know is exposed about what you do or what your processes are, you know, if we look at a lot of our, you know, say our celebrity clients, if there is a element of their life that is not going to change, that is going to continue to be exposed in the way, and there's going to be a certain amount of data that's out there about them. And so recognizing and empowering them to know these are the things out there, so that if someone is reaching out to them about something, giving them the proper tools to vet it, just as we would as a company. You know, when we're working with a corporation, say if it's a merger acquisition situation, we always say that you are only as secure as that weakest portion, that weakest link within the environment, so that if two companies are coming together and you're putting networks together, that network being, you know, whichever one is the strongest network is not the one that's the one, you know, leading the charge. It's the weaker network. And so recognizing that also within your personal connection. So in some cases, you may have taken every step possible to protect yourself, but you may have a family member or an associate. Maybe it's your investment advisor. Maybe it's a different element within your organization, your kind of close core, that their cyber habits may not be as strong as yours, and recognizing those exposures. So every bit of information that is shared across with them, whether it be, you know, attending an event or the fact that you do, you know, business with this individual, is a potential point of exposure, and recognizing how to be prepared to counteract an attack that could be orchestrated from that perspective.
So you mentioned something that's been a point of contention of mine on the risk management side for years now, which is IT departments managing cyber risk.
Absolutely. There's a lot of debate on that in the industry, and Chris and I've obviously had our own thoughts on that as well.
Yeah.
There needs to be the delineation between those areas. And that's not, I don't say that from the perspective of working together, because it's very critical that they work very effectively together. But we do see there needing to be a delineation between the independence of decision making and having equal exposure at that, and I hate the buzzword seat at the table, but I did a whole webcast series on security in the boardroom and around that element of having that section. But they need to have an equal voice, and they need to have the exposure not only to the other executives within the organization, but also within the board itself. And so being able to have the ability to say, this technology needs to be secured a different way, or maybe we need to explore this technology a little differently than as planned, and being able to have that respect and communication level is very important, because the answer is not necessarily on the technology side. Technology can be an enabler. Technology can also be a hindrance to the process. And so really taking a step back to look at technology as just a piece of security, and not as the be all end all of the security or the operations of the organization itself.
So for individuals that deal with cybercrime, that are affected by cybercrime, is it easy to investigate and prosecute?
It is not. Yeah, it's very difficult. It kind of, as I mentioned, we're all used to being able to go to, local law enforcement when there's specific types of crimes, that we're dealing with. But unfortunately, again, the law enforcement's just not trained for that. One of the biggest problems of cybercrime is that it's extremely difficult to investigate, extremely difficult to prosecute. It crosses jurisdictional borders, globally even. Unfortunately, again, law enforcement's not trained, but then when you have the global jurisdictional problem, and whose jurisdiction does it even fall in to begin with, and then how hard it is, how difficult it is to be able to get attribution back to who actually did it, and then the digital forensics investigation that you have to perform as part of that is all more complex type of crime. Not saying that's not investigatable, it certainly is, and you certainly can get prosecutions out of it. Oftentimes, what we see with our firm is, a lot of our clients will go after the individuals from a civil perspective, using tort law, and so they're actually suing once the crime is attributed or the wrong is attributed. There's this whole conversation in the research facilities around cybercrime is what's a cybercrime and what's a cyber wrong. It's very interesting when you start to look at how they consider it. The laws amongst all the 50 states in the United States differ for various cyber things that can occur to somebody, stalking, cyber stalking, right? Oftentimes there's not a cyber stalking statute in the books, but there's a stalking statute in the books. And so you have to kind of cross into those, elements of the crime to figure out, can it be prosecuted from a criminal perspective? And when it's not, then you go from a civil perspective and trying to deal with it. We've done things like site takedowns, cease and desists, working with some of our very valued law partners that we work with, and being able to actually help the individuals that are experiencing these very difficult types of cyber crimes, cyber wrongs that are occurring to them, and they're able to have a successful civil suit against them, or be able to successfully force some of the larger social media providers or other providers out there, application providers, to remove data on them or their families, or even their close connections that they work with, based on what they're experiencing. So it's very difficult. Bottom line is it's very difficult to investigate. It's hard to prosecute. This is why you don't see a whole lot of it in the news. You'll see occasionally, they'll catch a hacking group, some of the business email compromise groups. We worked several large cases last year around business email compromise. and some of the folks that were involved in that. So, you know, I think it's going to get to a point that law enforcement's going to have to get better at it. And in the meantime, they're going to have to come to organizations, you know, like ours, that actually has that experience and can help them through those very challenging types of investigations that they need. And then when you start talking about, you know, victims assistance, there's several, you know, organizations now out there that are trying to help cyber victims, because they have their own unique types of emotional trauma they're dealing with, you know, from that perspective too.
So I'm gonna shift gears a little bit to talk about children in cybercrime, because I know this is something that's near and dear to all of our hearts. Are children more susceptible to cybercrime? Teenagers, young children that have IoT devices?
Yes, I think they are, and reason being, you know, as I mentioned, you know, there's a very nefarious and vile segment of our population that prey on children. You know, I've personally seen how these individuals, you know how to use those technologies to entice children and to prey upon them. You know, children are innocent. They don't suspect. They don't have the cynicism that we develop as adults around, you know, what people can do to each other, and so they're very vulnerable in that sense. They're also very vulnerable to that, and I know we all are on the, you know, same passion about this, but you know, that very vile segment of population that preys on children, and so unfortunately, that segment knows the places that those children dwell online. That segment knows the types of devices they use, the gaming devices that are online, the social media areas that they like to go into, the three-dimensional worlds that they you know go into, and without calling any specific applications or providers out, they dwell in those areas. And when they do that for the whole, you know, intent of preying on those children, and you start getting into the, you know, the preteen, the teen years and ages, you know, they start to use extortion techniques, you know, trying to have these children, you know, expose themselves, and then utilize those photos to extort them and get more photos. There are entire call centers around sexual exploitation and in that sense of extorting children in foreign countries, where they get paid to do that and get as many photos as they can and then extort those children for that purpose. So I think this makes children so much more susceptible, just because they're, again, just very innocent. You know, they're unsuspecting, and then there's that, again, that vile segment that's so determined to, you know, victimize those children.
Yeah, I completely agree with Chris, and that's where, you know, when we're working with our clients, we really focus on looking at their cyber victimological profile and understanding not only as the client themselves, their children and their exposure points, and understanding that and being able to make sure that those children understand that in a way that is not a way to scare them, but makes them aware of those risk exposure areas, and understanding where to trust and where not to trust. You know, our children are inherently, as Chris said, trusting individuals. They have not seen all of the things that we may have seen in the world, and they you know, may have a tendency to trust the wrong individuals online. And so allowing them to understand in a way that they're aware, but not scaring them of these types of exposures that could be out there, and the ways that individuals might attempt to get their information or to entice them in any way, to get them in where they are able to recognize those types of situations and be able to step away from them, and to be able to alert the right adult in their family or within the executive protection team when they do see those attempts, is something that is very critical. We, you know, also see a lot of cases where we're monitoring for some of those exposures off of there with our clients, and able to alert from that perspective as well. And so it really takes an awareness to try to help protect these children, not only on the source of the children themselves, the individual, the client, themselves, but also the executive protection team that's working with them. So working together, there is the ability to reduce this risk. And when that risk is still exposed, being able to stop it before it becomes something that is, a true exploitation.
Absolutely. And, we have seen these cases. Last year, we had a very big case regarding a family that was targeted. And it was a long game targeting operation, right? They connected with an individual via social media, they built rapport, and then they moved into exploit. So, these incidents are very real. From the security side, we see it. How do you guys advise the clients, whether it's a celebrity client, whether it's a normal client, high net worth? How do you advise them to reduce their exposure to cybercrime or cyber victimization?
Yeah, I think one of the key things there is actually just mentioned is really education. There's components, some key components to any cybersecurity program at a corporation, and so it's very similar to individuals as well. When you start talking about the three kind of pillars we talk about, one being one of those is education and governance. So being able to govern your own cybersecurity. And so for individuals to protect themselves, they need to govern their exposure, their technology usage, and understand it. All that governance starts with understanding. Where can you be exposed, and what exactly are people trying to get relative to information on you, or relative to how they could attack you. Another point, another major pillar is incident response, and be able to respond to that. So having the ability to quickly deal with that situation. So having an executive protection team is absolutely awesome and very vital, important for people, that can utilize the EP teams to assist them. And then, and then the final pillar is really risk validation, or validating that risk, assessing yourself. And that's very difficult to do, and oftentimes that's why major companies and organizations, governments do what's called a penetration test or a risk assessment on themselves. And so that's what a lot of part of what we do as an organization. We provide that a risk assessment piece through our Cyber VIP program. We provide that risk validation piece, or the testing piece through our organization, and then the education piece. As Ashley mentioned, we've had many of our high notoriety celebrity clients that have asked us to speak with their children in a way that is not frightening to them, and in a way that really helps them to be educated and kind of make it fun at the same time, and help them to understand that there are people out there that are trying to do bad things, and because of their exposure, kind of overexposure, they are more likely to be targeted for that. So.
Well, Chris, we're discussing cybersecurity, CI2A. You guys do amazing work. Tell our listeners how they would reach out to you if they had questions, concerns, or needs.
Absolutely. I think they can visit our website at ci2a.us, and all our contact information is there. Probably the easiest way and manner. We're very easy to engage with. All of our offerings are very customizable. We're doing work in the cyber VIP realm as well as in the advisory CISO realm. So we still do a lot of work for major organizations and multiple verticals to help build out their cybersecurity programs, operationalize their cybersecurity programs, and then run those cybersecurity programs. And then from the cyber VIP perspective, we're really the only organization that has created a framework. We've got it trademarked. It's going into a patent process right now because of its uniqueness and its ability to provide that comprehensive type of assessment. And we work, we're very used to working with executive protection teams you guys as an awesome organization. I know that it's us working with y'all, and so if they want to reach out to us, we are here. We're available. We have intelligence specialists. We have the former CISOs that we have in our circle on our bench, and we have digital forensic examiners and incident responders. We can pretty much handle any type of cybercrime, and also be able to handle prevention and techniques to reduce the exposure of individuals just as much as organizations with our program.
Well, I appreciate your guys' time, and I know our listeners will appreciate all the information. Until next time, that's a wrap. We appreciate you for listening. Reach out to us, tngdefense.com. Any questions? All of our contact information is there. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
You've been listening to the North Group Podcast. We're security, refined by intelligence. If you have questions for us, they can be emailed to info@tngdefense.com or visit our website at www.tngdefense.com. Don't forget to subscribe and stay safe.